Ashley, congratulations on all that work. It's fantastic. One of the questions I've got is, at the producer end around water, and I know this is probably true of other metrics you didn't talk about, the metric that farmers are being asked to measure, and that is the water management or land management plans, is industry on top of that aiming to measure the use and the quality, either using industry-wide data or locally available water quality data to add some of the data that's actually being used to compare industry?
Good question. So I think there's a couple parts we could probably talk about. So grazing management plans are going to be very different depending on what part of the country you're in, and we have a lot of local resources. And so one of the things we're going to try to do is point producers to their local resources to try to make it as locally relevant as possible. And in a lot of cases that does incorporate, we have some USGS, a lot of data and maps that tell us a lot of things about water quality, wetlands, where they are, and a lot of those sorts of things. And so a lot of our technical assistants, our extension agents, utilize some of those as well. So yes, in as much as we can. And then I thought where you were going at the beginning of that was kind of adoption rates and how to kind of track those and whether we have them or not. And that's actually a really challenging one for us. And we are going to do our best to get more information out there, more surveys. We're going to have to rely on that a lot, but we do a lot of surveys, so we do have some data. But we'll have to do a lot more work on monitoring that, because we probably don't to date have a great feel for how many we have, how many producers actually, out of our 727,000 cow-calf producers, actually have grazing management plans.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all three presentations. Thank you very much for that. And it shows a certain proudness to be different also. Let's be from Australia, Africa, or US. But essentially we are all talking about the same topics, basically. Do you have the idea as three groups, not all being roundtables of GRSB, that you make use of each other's learnings and experiences to, in the most efficient way, to move forward? Because that's also, I think, one of the intentions of the GRSB. So, what's your opinion about it?
You start. You're supposed to take this one to the end, you know.
So definitely from an Australian perspective, I mean, we're not a round table, but that's obviously why we're here, is to really learn from the way the rest of the world is approaching these issues. And I mean, as Ashley said, it's amazing to see how much similarity there is once we start narrowing down from, whether it's 53, we've kind of got 23 priority areas. Once you start getting it down to the most critical, there's so much alignment between the regions. So to me, that's why we're here, is to learn from each other and hopefully improve on our processes. Should we just take it off that?
That's a bit logical. Yes, learn from everyone. Pip's comment as we were flying in here was that she's disappointed that she can't be in that room listening to the other groups, because we've just done two here, so we've missed what they've done. But I've really enjoyed listening to Max and Christine because it's been so different. Mm-hmm. But what it's put in my head is that you start from where you've got to start. And it's the continuous improvement that is the key to sustainability. So wherever you start at. Mm. You got any comments?
Being the new kids on the block, I think we've heard quite a lot of useful information. One of the things that is going to be very helpful is that we don't have to create quite a lot of stuff. There are things that have been started. There are things that are in development. There are things that have been finalized. The only thing that we need to do is pick this up and adapt it to what we're doing, where we are, what's relevant to our region. But it's been very interesting and very informative, and it's been a very good learning phase. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, just to reiterate what Christina said, I think our job here is to learn. I said it before, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We want to use the hard work you guys have done in the rest of the world, and would like to communicate with all the roundtables to make sure that we do it right.
Where are we passing it?
Ashley, do you?
Oh, I don't know that I have anything new to add. I think it's a great experience to come to GRSB. I know that just in North America, you know, between the U.S. and Canada, we're doing things differently, but we have a lot of similarities, and we talk to each other quite frequently when questions come up about, well, we haven't started our projects pillar, but, you know, what are you guys doing down there, and vice versa about, you know, how they're doing claims and logos.
Solidaridad. I have a question for Ashley. Well, first of all, Ashley, thanks for giving an overview of your journey. There was one thing you mentioned that I would like to know a bit more about. You mentioned that while you're working with farmers, which are national by definition, but with industry, with a more international leverage, and that one of the discussions that came up is how do you deal with imports? I guess that's also something that may come up in other roundtables, for instance in Europe, importing also from Southern Africa. How did you deal with that, and how can you ensure that what you're developing there can also be of interest in roundtables in other parts of America, or how you spread what you are developing there, and how importing in the US can also support sustainability developments in other countries?
Yeah, and I think that's maybe it ties in well for the previous question. And one of the things I think I'm thankful that we're part of GRSB is that we can rely on the work that's done in Brazil and other places in South America with that, and we can definitely reference, a lot of that work. And so again, not reinventing the wheel, ourselves, because again, we're not the experts, in North America on that issue anyway. But then we can also point them to another roundtable, and hopefully that drives, participation in other roundtables around the world. And again, we're all then going, we're singing from the same sheet of music, right? We encourage adoption of GTPS's metrics if that's where you're sourcing from, or other countries that have roundtables. So hopefully, we're driving to the same set of information depending on where you're sourcing. Does that make sense? Good.
Hello, Raquette Collins with McDonald's. I'm actually going to touch on the last two questions, then I have a question for Pip and Tony. But I think one of the things the GRSB kind of implemented after our meetings that we had in Australia last year was that the roundtable is now, or the GRSB is now asking each of the roundtables to be part of several different committees and conversations. So a lot of the GRSB's work is now being informed by the roundtables versus in the past, I think we were missing that piece. So I think that's another place that there's a lot of collaboration and cross-pollination of ideas and what's working in certain areas that may work in other areas. So I think that's something that has been a benefit to the GRSB since we've brought more of that roundtable structure in. And specific to your question on the sourcing piece, I mean, at least for McDonald's, that's why the regional roundtables are so critical, because we are sourcing from many regions, and we are pointing to those regions and what they're establishing in their roundtables to achieve those sustainability goals, along with the criteria and principles of the GRSB. So Pip and Tony, just interested in, I think you, in my mind, have done a lot around measurement, and while you've not achieved everything, or there's some things you're still trying to learn how to measure, I'd just be interested in your perspective on how you've come up with where you can measure today and that you're reporting as you make that continuous improvement versus there's some areas maybe you can't measure and yet you're still reporting regardless of whether or not all things can be measured and at all the same time.
So I mean, in our framework at the moment, I think we've got about 60% of our 56 indicators with data against it. And our whole approach has been utilising available data sets rather than requiring new systems to be established, particularly on farms. So, I mean, we have different systems in place through a lot of the supply chain. So feedlot, we had an established system, definitely processing, that we can draw on the data there. So that was kind of quite the easy piece. The on-farm sector is without a doubt the most difficult to get data for. So we're using a combination of, say, with some of the environmental areas, using satellite imagery to look at what the performance is, and we're able to line that up with the property codes. But there's some things that we don't really yet know how to measure. And Tony talked to, you know, that's why we're doing things like setting up expert working groups, and particularly around our vegetation management issues. And as Tony said also, getting the guidance of ecologists, productivity experts, and working with the remote sensors to figure out what more meaningful measures are in that space. So we always say with our framework, nothing's set in stone. The whole process will continue to evolve. And I think the indicators we've got against those 23 priority areas are the best way we know how to measure it now. And each year our report card will probably continue to have blanks for some time, but we're still acknowledging what those issues are. And, you know, we've already changed last year, I think, the way 3 or 4 are reported. And that's just based on us getting a better understanding of the issues and how to report. And I'd say that will continue to evolve through time. Yeah.
Yeah, look, just whenever we had an indicator, we ran it through filters and you know, transparency, relevant, etc. And you know, one of the things that, you know, could it be measured? Was it? You know, and often it couldn't be. Sometimes also we have indicators that we know where we could get them, but we know they're not going to be reliable enough. And the example used earlier is the grazing best management practice, which was developed on the reef catchment, Great Barrier Reef catchment. You know, it's a great system, it's self-assessed, and it will give us good data, but it's actually only over one catchment, so to take it national is just not appropriate. But it had some good on-farm stuff, but it's not just big enough yet. So whether that program gets rolled out over a greater area, and that's a possibility, because there are other areas that are interested, because it is a fairly handy tool, that might help us in the long run. So yes, it's there, but if it's not accurate enough, it's not going to be put in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's the difference also between a few of those self-assessment tools that are really about practice change, and it's more helping everyone to benchmark against their region, their neighbours, nationally, etc., and continually improve those practices. Whereas what we're seeking to do with the national framework is look at, well, what are the outcomes of some of those programs put in place? So things like, have you got a grazing management plan that's looking at, you know, fencing off riparian areas or whatever it is? And it's kind of a yes, no. But we're interested in the so what. What has been the impact of doing that, and trying to come up with measurements that look at what has been the impact on the environment in that instance, and other areas, you know, what's been the impact on welfare. So we've tried as much as we can to have those outcomes indicators, but I guess through necessity there's still a couple of process indicators in there. But that'll keep moving, yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a great session, and we really appreciate everybody's participation. Join me in giving our 5 panelists a hand. They did a magnificent job.